Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. Ben Whittaker is under no moral obligation to provide proof that he injured his leg against Liam Cameron. But at the same time, we as boxing fans are under no moral obligation to take Ben Whittaker at his word. And there are many fans who think that Ben Whittaker quit in this fight and faked an injury in order to do so. If that's not the case, and there was a genuine injury, then Ben Whittaker might want to consider doing what Kell Brook did after his loss to Gennady Golovkin and actually releasing the scans, the x-rays, to the public. Again, he's under no moral obligation to do so, but if he wants to try and salvage his reputation, then it's something he might want to consider. Now, as I was watching this fight with Liam Cameron, the first thing that jumped out to me was that Ben Whittaker wasn't doing his usual showboating. And personally, I like the showboating. I'm not one of these people that complains about it. I like it, but he wasn't doing any of it. Is it because he thought it would be not well received by the Saudi audience? Is it because he didn't think he could get away with it against Liam Cameron, who was a step up from his previous opposition? Or was it because he was in a different headspace and he came into this fight more serious, not looking to play around? Only Ben Whittaker could answer that question. But in the first couple rounds, Ben Whittaker was getting the better of it, but Liam Cameron started touching him up a little bit, and Whittaker appeared to weaken very quickly. He was trying to style it out, to use an old school term, and keep some positive, confident looking body language, but I didn't buy it. He didn't have a good poker face. To me, it was clear that he was tiring rapidly, and questions need to be asked about that. Why would he tire so rapidly? The fight wasn't being fought at a particularly hot pace. It wasn't an extremely slow paced fight, but it certainly wasn't Hagler Hearns. But somehow Whittaker was looking very tired, drained, depleted, and you sensed that there was maybe an upset brewing here, because Liam Cameron, by contrast, looked like he was just getting going. Looked like he had plenty left in the tank. It looked ominous for Ben Whittaker. It looked like a scenario that we've seen so many times over the years, with an inexperienced prospect going in against a vet and being taken into deep waters and drowned. To give you a few examples, David Haye, when he fought Carl Thompson back in the days. More recently, Josh Kelly, when he was stopped by David Avanesian. Yes, this fight, after a couple rounds, started to look eerily reminiscent of those fights. And just when you thought that we might see an outcome similar to those fights, with Ben Whittaker maybe going down and being stopped, we then have this incident where they get tied up in a clinch and Liam Cameron leans on Ben Whittaker, and it results in them both flipping over the top rope and out of the ring. Ben Whittaker immediately starts grimacing and complaining about his leg. And my first thought was, he's play acting. He wants out of the fight because he was anxious about the way the fight was going, and he wanted to avoid the humiliation of a knockout defeat on this big Saudi card. That was my first thought. Again, I can't prove that that's what actually happened, and I'm open to the possibility that I could be wrong, but that was my initial impression. I'm not gonna lie. I looked at Ben Whittaker and I said, for some reason, I don't believe you. And then we saw the instant replays, many of them, the slow-mo from different angles. As Ben Whittaker falls on the ring apron, his right leg maybe jolts a bit as it lands, and he possibly hits his foot on the metal stairs leading up to the ring. But what I was looking for was signs of him twisting a leg or something, because that's generally where you're gonna get some type of leg injury in boxing, is when something gets twisted. But I didn't see anything like that. Was the jolt and the impact on the metal stairs enough to give him an injury that would mean he couldn't continue? Maybe, but I will remain skeptical until Ben Whittaker produces medical proof. And I'm not talking about a doctor's note. I would need to see a scan, because Whittaker didn't even attempt to stand up in the ring to see if he could put weight on his leg. As soon as he was down on the canvas, he just said, nope, it's done. Now, for him to do that, surely, if it's a genuine injury, it must be something quite serious. Furthermore, and this is really interesting, Ben Whittaker was taken from the ring in a wheelchair. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that, according to reports, DAZN later posted this picture, this photo, with the caption, Ben Whittaker punched a hole in the wall backstage after his draw to Liam Cameron. Now, if your leg is so mashed up that you can't continue in the fight and you have to be taken from the ring in a wheelchair, how are you able to punch this hole in the wall backstage? Surely he must have been standing up to create the kind of leverage necessary to do this damage. So yeah, big question marks over that. Boxing fans have already dubbed him Ben Whittaker. Many of them are saying that he is a fraud, that this incident proves he's not going anywhere in boxing, and that he'll never be a world champion, etc., etc. And they might be right. However, I don't want to jump to that conclusion just yet, because I know the history of boxing, and there have been some fighters over the years who pulled stunts, quit in fights, but went on to become Hall of Famers. One example would be Bernard Hopkins. Oh yes, Bernard Hopkins. Maybe some of you are not aware that he pulled many shenanigans in his career over the years. One of them was fairly early on in his boxing career. And when I say early on, Hopkins' career spanned several decades. Okay, so it was an extraordinarily long career. But this was during his run as middleweight champion. Early on during his run as middleweight champion. He fought a guy called Robert Allen. They fought several times, but this was their first fight. And Robert Allen was outboxing Bernard Hopkins early on. Southpaw, coming out doing his thing. So he's outboxing Bernard Hopkins. Hopkins just can't seem to get a foothold in the fight early. And then they tangle up and Hopkins ends up falling out of the ring. And Hopkins is rolling around in agony. Ah, my back. Many people didn't buy Hopkins' claim that he was injured. They believed that he, for whatever reason, didn't think the fight was going to go his way. Maybe he wasn't in the right mind state. Maybe he'd had a bad camp, whatever. And when he fell out the ring, he found an easy way out of the fight. Now, to be fair to Hopkins, he rematched Robert Allen right away and he stopped him. This was something like 8 months later, but it was his next fight. And so for Ben Whittaker, I think that's what he needs to do with Liam Cameron. I think he needs to rematch him right away. Unless he's willing to provide proof of an injury, like some type of scan, the only other solution to all of the criticism and doubt surrounding him right now is to have an immediate rematch with Liam Cameron and put it right. But can he do it? You know, I've said for a long time that outside of the heavyweight division and maybe one or two other divisions, it's not so easy to get world-class sparring in the UK. And for any prospect coming through, you're really going to need world-class sparring to get used to how tough it is. In the upper echelons, it's not just the superior skills that you encounter as you move up through the rankings. It's the superior will. Ben Whittaker is very athletically gifted. He's a very tall guy, 6'3". He may not be used to opponents in actual fights or in sparring sessions being able to get past his talent, his height, his reach, his speed, to test his heart and his chin and his stamina. He might not be used to that. The way you get used to it is through top quality sparring, not polite sparring sessions where people are trying to take your head clean off. I think Ben Whittaker may have done some training and sparring in the US in the past, but I think he needs to do a lot more of it. He was trained by Sugar Hill previously. I don't think he's with him anymore. I think he needs to revive that relationship and do what Hamza Shiraz did and spend the next, let's say, 18 months based in the US, getting that top quality sparring against people who are trying to take his head off, who are testing him every day in the gym, not just in terms of skills, but physically and psychologically. And I think that has paid off very well for Hamza Shiraz. I reckon it would pay off very well for Ben Whittaker as well, because the way he looked in the Liam Cameron fight was like a fighter who's had it a bit too easy. Never mind in his pro fights, because he's just a prospect, right? Everybody gets matched relatively softly when they're coming through. He hasn't even had 10 pro fights yet, but I'm talking about in the gym. He looks like someone who's had it a bit too easy in sparring. So that's what I would advocate for. Way more tough sparring for this guy and a rematch with Liam Cameron. Let's say, I don't know, in 6 months' time, if they want to give Ben Whittaker a little bit of a rest or whatever. Bit of time to get his mind straight, get the right kind of sparring in and what have you. Now, as for the showboating, as I previously said, I like the showboating. He wasn't doing it in this fight. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, from an entertainment perspective, for me, it was a bad thing. But it's also possible that it was a bad thing from a fighting perspective as well, because showboating can sometimes work quite well as a method of psychological warfare. It can trick your opponent into thinking that you're more confident than you really are, that you're more comfortable than you really are. It can help to frustrate and even demoralize an opponent. And it can also help to disguise your moves, because Ben Whittaker was fighting in a much more conventional fashion against Liam Cameron, and that might have made him more predictable in terms of the punches he was going to throw. Whereas when he's showboating and swaying left and right and doing all this crazy stuff, maybe that introduces the element of surprise. Ben Whittaker has been compared to Prince Naseem in the past. He's not as talented as Prince Naseem. He certainly can't hit like Prince Naseem pound for pound. Prince Naseem, of course, was a much smaller fighter, but again, pound for pound, he hit way harder than Ben Whittaker. But later on in Prince Naseem's career, he hooked up with two trainers. One of them was called Oscar Suarez, and the other one was the famous late great Manny Stewart. And he had this weird thing for at least one of his fights, certainly the Barrera fight, where he was being trained by both of them, and they would literally take turns in between rounds. So for one round, Suarez would be the one giving the instructions, and for the other round, it would be Manny Stewart. A very strange setup. But one of the critiques that people had of Prince Naseem working with Manny Stewart is that Manny Stewart was making him too conventional. As great a trainer as Manny Stewart was, there's no one-size-fits-all boxing coach. Manny Stewart is not going to be the right fit for everybody. And many people argued at the time that he wasn't the right fit for Prince Naseem, and that Prince Naseem was at his best under Brendan Ingle. Obviously, he fell out with Brendan Ingle, and they went their separate ways. But that Brendan Ingle style, which was really the Harold Graham style that became popular in the Ingle gym, is what took Prince Naseem to world success in the first place. Now, obviously, that style had its flaws, it had its issues, particularly when Naseem was fighting taller fighters. But it also had its advantages. And like I've previously said, there was the element of surprise. There was punching from unconventional angles because Prince Naseem was moving in an unconventional fashion. His stance was unconventional. Sometimes he'd be completely square on, hands down, like he was doing limbo dancing or something at times. Everything about it was unconventional. Then he'd come out with these huge uppercuts from bizarre angles. But once he started fighting like a traditional fighter under Manny Stewart, it made him more easy to read. Could the same be the case here with Ben Whittaker? It's a possibility. Maybe not. Maybe he would have performed even worse if he'd done all the showboating against Liam Cameron. Maybe he would have got knocked out in a couple rounds. I don't know. But I think there's at least a possibility that with the showboating, with the unconventional moves, that he'd actually do better against Liam Cameron. So that's my take on it. Give me your take in the comment section below. Do you think that Ben Whittaker pulled a fast one in this fight and quit? Or do you think he was genuinely injured? Let me know. And before I go, make sure you check out these videos that I've just uploaded to my Patreon page. One of them is a nearly 3-hour career review on Riddick Bowe, where I analyze footage of many of his most significant fights. So this is not the screenshots I use on YouTube. This is actual video footage of his fights. And I've also uploaded this video of the first round of Beterbiev versus Bivol, where I'm actually counting the number of punches landed, because CompuBox for that particular round was way off. Not even close to being accurate. The real punch stats for that round were far closer than CompuBox had them. And they missed the best punch of the round, which was actually landed by Artur Beterbiev. That's a fact. That's not conjecture. I show it in this video in slow motion, in HD, so there can be absolutely no doubt whatsoever. If you want to access this video along with hundreds of hours worth of other exclusive boxing content, as well as our members chat, just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called the Boxing Brotherhood. There's no contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time, just like Netflix, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper. Just download the app from the Play Store or the App Store. All the links are in the description box below.